Today, we're going a little bit off of script, guys. I had a conversation that I wanted to have with the group, and over the last couple of days, probably the last couple of weeks, I made a decision to kind of switch conversations. This week, I think a lot of people find themselves in a place where they didn't expect themselves to be again. And our businesses are in a place where maybe we were hoping they wouldn't be again in terms of rules established for us in our business and in our personal worlds. And it's the world that we find ourselves in, guys. And I thought that there's probably no better conversation to have today than a conversation around leading in times of change. And so I'm going to share my screen with you guys and take you through a conversation that I've been having with some of our local leaders, and I wanted to have with all of our agents as well, our top agents here today. This actually comes from what I believe is one of the better CEOs and companies and founders of leading through change. And that is Jeff Bezos and his company, Amazon. In fact, I've often referred to the book, The Amazon Way, and really not necessarily because it's written brilliantly, but more so because it takes the 14 leadership principles that Jeff has built his organization, his company around, and has become part of Amazon. I've shared openly that I've been able to learn about Amazon, obviously through reading, through studying. My brother works and has worked for probably the last 7-ish years last 5 years directly for Jeff Bezos. And obviously now as Jeff transitions out, he's working for someone else. But it's interesting to see an insider's perspective on these 14 leadership principles. But one of the things that most people will say if they work there is the best part of working at Amazon is that everything is always on an improvement path, which means everything is always constantly changing, which means nothing is static. In fact, at Amazon, they have this constant drive to make it faster, to add new features, to do it cheaper, to reduce errors, to delight the customer, to constantly change. And that can be, straight up exhausting. And as I think about where we've been over the last 12 to 18 months, I think it's easy for us to take a step back and say, hey, I'm just tired. Like we change and then we change back and now we're changing back again. Like there's constant change. And interestingly enough, as leaders and business owners, we have to internalize principles that we live by, principles that we make decisions by. In fact, Amazon refers to it as change IQ. When you hear that word or that phrase, change IQ, what do you think of? What do you think goes into our change IQ? What do you think, guys? Go ahead and raise your hand. I won't be able to see, but maybe Leslie, you can just call on whoever raises their hand, or people can shout. I don't care.
You're just getting bombarded with hand raises.
Oh.
No.
Change IQ, what do you think? Or I'll just call on someone.
Maybe our ability to kind of process, go through change. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you do know, Jake, because you've gone through a lot of change in the last year and your change IQ has been actually quite high. It's the ability to embrace change, right? It's the ability to make decisions through change. It's the ability to not get sidetracked or bombarded or overwhelmed with change. And if we're going to win in this industry, guys, right now, we better have some pretty high change IQ. Warren Buffett tells his board that he wants them to combat the ABCs, right? This is a Warren Buffettism, if you will. He says when he speaks to his board, hey, we have to be willing to combat the ABCs. And the A stands for arrogance, the B stands for bureaucracy, and the C stands for complacency. Right? He wants the board to have a high change IQ, eliminate arrogance, eliminate bureaucracy, and eliminate complacency. Well, the reality is in our world right now, we have to be able to improve our change IQ as leaders, or we're going to have some problems. These leadership principles that we're going to go through today, and there's 14 of them that we're gonna whip through pretty quick. But those leadership principles were, Jeff Bezos said, these are not just principles. These principles work hard just like we do, is what he said. These principles work hard just like we do. Amazonians use these principles every single day, whether they're talking about new ideas, whether they're working on a project, whether they're deciding on the best solution for their customers' problems, whether they're interviewing future candidates. They use these 14 principles. The first one is on your screen, and it's sort of the premise of Amazon as a whole, and it needs to be our premise right now, and it's obsess over the customer. Obsess over the customer. What does that mean? What do you think that means if we're going to obsess over the customer?
They matter most.
They matter most. They matter most. Yeah. In fact, Jeff says this. He says leaders start with the customer and then work backwards. You know what's interesting about our business? Most of us didn't do that. Just by nature, the fact of how we got into this business, what do? We started with, how do I get a lead? How do I convert the lead? How do I show a house? How do I list that house? How do I sell them something? And then we talk about customer experience. But if we're going to obsess over the customer moving forward right now, based on the sizes of the businesses that are in this room, we need to start with the customer and then work backwards, is what Jeff Bezos says. They at Amazon work vigorously to earn and keep the customer's trust. So he said, yeah, we know about our competitors. We pay attention to the competitors, but we obsess over our customers. Now, do you think our industry does that well? It doesn't. It's almost comical how much companies obsess over their competitors. It's almost comical sometimes how much even individual agents obsess over what their competitors are doing. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What do they do? Maybe I'll do that. I'll buy that too. And we obsess over what the competitor is doing instead of obsessing over what our consumer or our customer wants. And interestingly enough, what we have found now in a world of disruption across many industries is disruption invariably lies between or lies on top of the customer experience. All great disruption across all industries actually started by putting the customer first and then working backwards. Like, if any industry is beginning to get disrupted or has been disrupted in the past, think about it. What did they disrupt? Did they disrupt a system? Was it really technology that disrupted the industry? It wasn't any of that. It was someone focused on the customer or consumer, and they said, hey, I'm going to start with the customer and then work backwards and build for the customer. Guys, in times of change, we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to take a step back and say, hey, at this moment in time, what does my seller need? At this moment in time, what does my buyer need? What are they looking for? What would make their lives easier? What problems do they have, and how can they solve them in a simple way? And interestingly enough, some of us, as I look across the videos here, some of us actually, their customer is actually no longer a buyer or seller, but your customer or consumer are your agents. And if we woke up every single day and said, hey, who is my customer? My customer is my agent, my buyer's agent, my listing agent, my partner agent on my team, and I'm going to work backwards. Man, you would never have a problem attracting agents to your business and to your team. Why? Because they got plenty of problems that they're not solving for themselves. And if you solved it for them and you obsessed over the agent, they would show up, I promise. Right? Just like we have this conversation right now about if we can make a frictionless experience in home buying and home selling for the consumer. If you had a frictionless experience for the real estate agent to close deals, again, your business would continue to grow and move forward in times of change. Lesson number 1 is obsess over the customer. Lesson number 2, take ownership of results. Take ownership of results. Jeff Bezos says that leaders are owners. In fact, his whole compensation structure, by the way, at Amazon is largely based on the fact that he believes that if you own something, you will act differently. And here's why. Because he said, I never wanted anyone in my organization to make a decision or change a business model for the short term. We always play long term. He said, owners do not sacrifice the long term for short term results. And yet, who does? Employees do at times. Real estate agents do at times. We sacrifice the long term for the short term. We want a deal today, so we don't do the work that we need for tomorrow, right. We've had a recent conversation about Rory Vaden's book. Remember about the emotion behind time management and really time multiplication, and how oftentimes we focus on important and urgent and not significant. And significant from last month or 2 months ago when we had this conversation, significance is about how long will this matter. Owners care about the future. So we just want to make sure we're not sacrificing long-term value for short-term results. We want to approach every business decision. We want all of our people to approach every business decision as an owner, not a renter. Think about that. That is a great conversation to have with our people. And my hope is after these calls, right, you'll take your notes and you'll say, hey, let's have a team meeting, right? Let's have a meeting with our group or our leadership or our agents and have that conversation. I want you to approach every decision, not as a renter, but as an owner. Because don't you make different decisions in your house if you own it versus you rent it? Yeah, I want my agents to start painting the walls. I want my agents to start remodeling the kitchen. I want my agents to be putting in the work into the organization because they see themselves here long term, that the changes that they're willing to put energy towards and effort towards for their consumer and their customer and the business that they're part of, man, they can put that energy and effort towards it because they're going to be here forever. It's a very, very insightful thing to look at and say, hey, are my people acting like renters right now? Or are they acting like owners right now? We want owners, not renters in our business. In a shareholder meeting back in 1997, Jeff Bezos said, he said this, he said, we know our success will be largely affected by our ability to attract and retain a motivated employee base, each of whom must think like and therefore must actually be an owner. So every employee has what? Ownership. They have stock in that company. Why? Because he said his success, the success of that organization long-term from a legacy perspective will be based on this principle, everybody taking ownership of the results. Principle number 3 in leading during times of change. And don't get too excited, but it's invent and simplify. Invent and simplify. Here's the reality. It is harder to simplify than we think, especially in this industry, especially in an industry that we have historically decided that what we do and how we do it is going to be an explanation and a validation of the income and money that we make. As we do new things, we have to understand that we may have misunderstood things for a really, really long time. And we're a legacy industry, guys, right? We're hundreds of years old. And some of the things we're doing still are hundreds of years old. And they're complicated. So Jeff Bezos says, principle number 3, to lead during times of change, especially change that we may not ask for, especially change of going back and forth in the environment that we find ourselves in. We have to be able to invent, and then especially right now, we have to be able to simplify. We have to be able to simplify. Some of that is our process. Jeff Bezos is a process guy. In one of his shareholders' letters, he said, good process is absolutely essential. This is when he was doubling down and reinvesting in the company and building process. He said, without defined processes, you can't scale, you can't even manage. So we've talked a lot about with this group how important their processes are, right? As much as sales is and talent acquisition is, like all of that will sit on top of the processes that you've built or been willing to build or found talent to build. Invent and simplify is principle number 3. You guys are going to love principle number 4 because Jeff Bezos says leaders are right a lot. And you're thinking, yes, I know that. Yes, I am right a lot. I tell my team that, my spouse that, like I'm right. The challenge is leaders typically do have good judgment and good instincts. And that's only because the best leaders seek diverse perspectives, right? Jeff said that he has constantly looked to work to disconfirm his own beliefs. A few months back, we talked about the book Think Again, Adam Grant's book. And this is in line with Jeff Bezos's perspective. And this perspective has been on his wall for, gosh, over a decade. Leaders are right a lot. The caveat to that in dialogue is that we need to constantly work to disconfirm our own beliefs. And that's because if we do, it allows us to challenge our belief that we're always right. Much of that, he says, comes down to the questions we ask ourselves and the questions we allow others to ask of us. Sometimes we get defensive, right? Even when an agent on our team or maybe an operational person will say, well, why do we do it that way? Or why don't we do it this way? Or can't I just do it this way? And I'm a systems and process guy. So my immediate reaction is oftentimes, well, no, you can't. Like, that's not the way we do it here. However, if we don't realize that a lot doesn't mean always, we're going to get ourselves in trouble, especially in times of change. So leaders, yes, they're right a lot, but they have to have a high degree of tolerance for failure and questioning whether or not it's still right today. Principle number 5 is learn and be curious. You know, it's interesting. You guys are demonstrating that right now. You have a lot of things that you could be doing right now, right? Some of you are closing 20 homes this month, 30 homes this month. As I look who's on here, I think there's a group here closing 40 homes this month. There are other things to do. I understand that, and yet you raise your hand and say, "Hey, I'm gonna try to learn something today. I'm gonna be curious today." Leaders are never done learning, are always seeking to improve themselves. We always believe that anybody can teach us something. I'm a firm believer in that. Doesn't matter how long they've been in the business, what they've accomplished. I believe I can learn something from every person in any room. Jeff says there's no at Amazon, right? There is no. If there is I don't know how to do that, then there's always a way to find out. He said, I will figure out solutions no matter how complicated figuring it out is. Why? Because he loved taking that complicated and then making it simple, which is his earlier principle number 3, invent and simplify. So stay learning based, guys. Stay curious, guys. Principle number 6. And interestingly enough, let me just go back a second. Any one of these principles, I hope we'll send this out so you have it, but any one of these principles, we're looking at it as leaders of businesses, right? Each one of you on this call runs and leads a fairly big business. But every one of these principles works for everybody in our organization as well. Teaching these principles to our people will actually move the needle in your organization. Why? Because everybody in our organization should be learning based and should be curious as well. Number 6 is hire and develop the best. Hire and develop the best. Which part of that are we usually good at this part in our career? The first part or the second part? The hire or the develop?
The hiring.
Yeah, Haley, you're right. Largely because that's the first part, that's the first thing or the first step in that process that we learn. Partly because that's mostly for us the fun of it, because we are salespeople, right? And so hiring seems like a hunt and kill. Hiring is the close. Like, yes, we hired them, but Jeff said leaders hire and develop. And I think that this is a whole for us. Most hires that don't work out, it's not the hire's fault, guys. Most. Once in a while, we are way off, and we somehow bring a little bit of crazy into our worlds. But for the most part, guys, we're good at the hiring part. We begin to master the hiring part, and it feels like we're winning when we make the hire. But the win is on the development of it. We need to make sure that we have exceptional talent, and then we need to move them throughout the organization. Look around your organization, and if you see for a moment that the people in your organization years later are in the same role that they were in the organization when they showed up in the organization, guess what that means? We may be hiring, but we may not be developing. Now, the reason why sometimes we don't do that is because they're so good where they are. Like, they are just great at what they do right there. And it's actually more painful for us to find someone to do what they are doing so well again. But I promise you, it'll be more painful if we don't develop them and put them on a growth plan and understand what their preferred future is. It'll be more painful when they leave your organization to go find their future in someone else's. Because why? Because we hired them and then we didn't develop them. Tony Hsieh was a master at this, right? The late Tony Hsieh eventually sold Zappos, his company, to Amazon. But he said this. He said, you have to look around your organization, and at times you'll see that person that you've had a long time, and you'll go around the room, and the leadership team will say, hey, what do you think about so and so? What do you think about Chris? Right? Tony would look and say, hey, what do you think about Chris? And if my supervisor or my leader said, he's a solid guy, Tony said, that is the kiss of death. Right? Because being a solid guy should be a non-negotiable, but when you end, right, when you start as a solid guy and you end as a solid guy, that means I just didn't develop into something other than a solid guy. Now, that's partly on me, but it's partly on the leader if we're not developing our good human beings into talented business people. So ask yourself, like, where do I need help with hiring? And how do I continue to develop my people, which will actually force growth, guys, right? If you're looking around, like, well, where do I move them to? Like, what should they do? The fact is we may not be thinking big enough in our business to allow a new role to show up or be developed for our people. Like, each step of our business growth has truly been not me driving that growth, but someone in the organization that was wildly more talented than I was, that wanted to do something different or pushed me to do something different because they were talented enough to do it. Lesson number 7. During times of change, we need to make sure that we insist on the highest standards. Why do you think, I would love to get your perspective, why do you think sometimes during times of change, our standards actually go backwards? Why could that happen during times of change?
Focus too much on the change versus what's in front of you.
Yeah, I think that's part of it for sure, James. Sandy?
I was thinking we're taking our energy to deal with what's coming up that's next and different, and we assume that the other things are being taken care of like they should be.
Yeah. You know what I found, guys? is oftentimes during times of change, it really shines some light on where things were a little bit broken before. Anyone see that over the last year? We during times of change or disruption, we're like, well, wow, we weren't prepared for that, or he wasn't prepared for that, or she wasn't prepared for that, or I wasn't prepared for that. And so then what happens? We think, well, gosh, I better go and fix this. I better hold that person accountable to doing what they were supposed to be doing. Or production slows, right? Because there's a shift and a change. And we say, well, why is production showing? And then all of a sudden we have this extra energy to try to fix a standard that was already there in the past that we weren't holding people to. And then we shy away from it. Why? Because it just seems like the wrong time to push. Like we should have been pushing in great times. We should have been holding people accountable to a standard in good times. And then there's times of change and we think, well, man, I could just break them or crack them if I push too hard right now. So it's because we didn't do what we were supposed to be doing before that we actually shy away from holding people to a standard today. We have to look around our organization and say, gosh, where have we not been insisting on the highest standards? And why is that showing up right now? And how do I balance that immediately? Leaders should always be raising the bar as well, and to be driving teams to increase the quality of their services, increase the quality of their processes, increase the quality of the product that they're delivering. It doesn't mean increase your production. It doesn't mean sell more houses always. However, I promise you this, if you focused on your service, if you focused on the delivery of the product, if you focused on your process, guess what's going to happen? Your production in our world is going to go up. Why? Because we're a service industry, not a sales business. In any service industry, if your service improves, if the product improves, like guess what happens? Production goes up as well. If we insist on the highest standards, we would never struggle with production. Now, Jeff is a little bit crazy, right? Like, if you talk to people within the organization, you will find that even a small service failure is far from trivial in his world, right? He cares about every little thing. And some of us know leaders like that. That is what makes some of us at times difficult to deal with. However, here's an example. Early on, if anything went wrong with any product that Amazon sold, guess what happened? They stopped selling it until the manufacturer of that product fixed it, right? If they got bad reviews on any product, Jeff held the power to stop the sale of that product. Now, think about that. That wasn't even his product. It was someone else's product that they were selling. But he cared so much about the standard of what people associated his brand with that he was willing to stop production or stop selling or stop increasing revenue. Are we willing to do that if we see a breakdown in our systems, in our service, in our customer experience, in our onboarding of agents, in the fact that maybe our agents aren't hitting the production level that we expect them to? Then do we just keep on hiring agents, or do we fix the standard, our own standards of how we get them into production? This simple lesson or this simple principle in times of change is critically important. It's funny, like this can peg you as a leader as obsessive and compulsive and overbearing and having unreasonably high standards. But you know what Amazon was supposed to be called? Anyone know that? It wasn't going to start as Amazon.com. Anyone know what his first URL was? His first, he still owns it. Garrett? Oh, I thought you were going to guess.
Bookstore.
I missed that.
Bookstore.
It wasn't actually. You know what it was?
One of the middle alphabet letters.
It was the word relentless, guys. Interestingly enough, he bought relentless.com, and that was going to be the name of his company. And everybody around him said, I don't think you want that being put out into it. We're not going to be able to recruit to that. We're not going, but that was Jeff Bezos's personality, guys. He is relentless. That is the word that would describe his very high standards. But look at what it's produced. Lesson number 8. Leadership principle number 8 is thinking big, and we have no lack of big thinkers in this room, which is awesome. It's why we wanted to bring this group together. In a letter in April 2013, in a letter to his shareholders, Bezos said this. He said, "I am willing to sacrifice this year's entire profits to invest in long-term customer loyalty and product opportunity that will create bigger profit next year." At times, our thinking big will potentially limit what we do this year for the future of the business next year. Big thinkers are always, it is always a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was a constant with him. He would sacrifice profit on his quest to think bigger always. Now, we don't want you guys sacrificing profit. Like, that's not the industry that we're in. Like, we don't have to do that. However, in times of change, it's important that we do not get too myopic in our viewpoint, or too focused in our viewpoint, that we stop thinking big because we're scared about where we are today, or we're scared about what will happen next month, or we're scared about where the industry might be in December or February or June. Like, the fact is he was always willing to sacrifice this year for next year because he thought big. Lesson number 9. And this is probably one of his greatest gifts. He had a bias for action. And in fact, everybody that works there has a bias for action. You know, Amazonians, there's been a lot in the public about the culture of Amazon, and they went through a pretty rough spot for a period of time where there was disgruntled workers because they quite honestly probably worked too hard. They made fun of a lot of people that left Amazon and went to work at Google, and left Amazon and went to work at Microsoft. In fact, they teased them publicly, through social, in the New York Times, and said, people that leave here typically retire and go to Google. People that leave Amazon retire and go to Microsoft. People that leave Amazon retire and take early retirement and head over to Apple. And their perspective, that was their perspective, because Jeff's perspective is, I have a bias for action. We're going to do the work. We're going to work hard. And he says this, he said, speed matters in business. There's a lot of conversation about, or viewpoint that this is what made Amazon Amazon. Jeff's perspective, Bezos's perspective, was that there are very few decisions, and I shared this with a group yesterday, but there are very few decisions in his business, in his industry, and I would argue in any business, in any industry, that are irreversible, right? He called most decisions that Amazon had to make a two-way door. In other words, you can go in and you could go out. It's not a one-way door. Very rarely will any of us on this call, on this Zoom, ever make an irreversible decision. And because we know that as a fact, it gives us permission to have a bias for action. I would much rather someone make the wrong decision, but make a decision, than take way too long trying to confirm that we're going to make the right decision. All decisions that you're going to make are reversible. They do not need extensive research and extensive study and extensive. Now, some of us were like, good, right? Because I make quick decisions, and some of us, this is a struggle, right? Because we like to think through it. I historically, right, I was raised as the person that needed to think through everything and go very, very slow in taking action. And the reality is, in business, It doesn't work that way. Very few decisions you're going to make are irreversible. Even with people, sometimes we struggle. Like, is it the right person? Is it the right person? Is it the right person? Is it? And by the time you make a yes, they've moved on. Why? Because you just lost someone that actually had a bias for action, and they took action while you were sitting and waiting. You will have more loss by not making decisions. You will have more loss by not taking action than for the failures that you're going to need to clean up, or the messes you're going to need to clean up from having that bias for action. It's interesting. Like, many of you are great for me because you pushed me. Like, hey, Chris, you said you were going to make a decision on this. Hey, Chris, where are we on with this? Hey, Chris, like, what about this? And there are some decisions that some of you, as I think through this, are still pushing me on today. And you can call me out and say, hey, you haven't had a bias for action on this. Like, make a decision, Chris. Like, having a bias for action is critical. Lesson number 10. This one I love, and I know some of you do as well. It's practice frugality. Now, we're not talking about being cheap, although sometimes I love that too. We're not talking about necessarily saving money. We're talking about a phrase that Jeff Bezos uses that I love, and he says, accomplish more with less. Guys, this goes for financing, it goes for talent, it goes for business. I'm looking around the room, and there are some incredibly small and ridiculously productive and incredibly profitable teams. Why? Because you nail principle 10. You nail this principle that you accomplish more with less. And here's why this is a really good principle, guys, because constraints breed resourcefulness. When you have constraints on your budget, when you have constraints on your people, when you have constraints on yourself, it will birth being resourceful. It will breed self-sufficiency. It will breed invention. Some of the greatest inventions came out of people that did not have money. Some of the worst inventions came out of people that had clearly too much money. Fair? Like, accomplish more with less. The fact is every dollar saved is an opportunity to invest in the company. I also look at it this way. Every dollar that I'm willing to not spend is a dollar that I could give to someone else to spend, whether on themselves, whether in their department, whether in the growth of the business that we're partnered in. Man, practice frugality, guys. And our industry sucks at this. Straight up, it does. Why? Because many of us, let's be honest, we didn't come from money, and then all of a sudden we had it and we don't know how to spend it. And so that's what we do. We spend it. I heard one of the greatest conversations some time ago, and I'll never forget it. I've shared it in the past, but it was Seth Godin. And it was a conversation that he was talking about just business in general. And he just got off track, but it's perfectly on track for our conversation right now. And he said, you know what? It is harder to run a business than it is to run a sports team. It's harder to run a business than to run a sports team. And here's why. Because most sports, and I'm not a sports guy, so you could tell me which sports don't have a salary cap, but a lot of sports now have salary caps, right? They have a salary cap, which means they can only spend a certain amount of money for each position or for all their players. Fair? And let's get off of salary for a minute. Let's just go to sports in general. Like, the fact is if your center fielder keeps on dropping the ball, you don't get to put in a left center fielder. Like, you got a left fielder, a center fielder, and a right fielder. And if someone's dropping the ball in the middle of the field, you don't get to hire an extra person and say, well, hey, John, hey, Mary, hey, Sue, hey, Carolyn, go and help the center fielder, would you? Because we can't afford drop balls. But in business, we do that all the time. Balls start to drop, and what do? We hire away, right? Man, like, we're not converting leads, so we go and get another agent instead of doing what? Instead of coaching up the agent that's dropping the leads in the first place, instead of holding agents accountable to running the database the way it was designed to be. Like, we actually pump more money into leads so that our agents are more productive. And all we're doing is looking for the now buyer or the now seller, which is 1 in 500. So go ahead, buy 500 more leads instead of doing what? Running your business like a sports team. It happens with our staff. It happens with our agents, because we are not accomplishing more with less. I promise you, if there's one lesson we learned today, we take these 14 and say, hey, Chris, which one do you care about the most? Clearly, it's this one. We all need to accomplish more than with less, especially in times of change. Let me give you an example. Jeff Bezos practiced this regardless of how many billions of dollars he had in the bank and how many billions of dollars his company made. They have a beautiful building that now sits pretty much empty, but they have a beautiful building in downtown Seattle, right? And before they built that, they went to their employees and said, hey, would you want to be here? Would you like, I mean, they really engaged their top level employees and said, hey, do you want to be out of the city? Do you want to be in the city? And they said, oh my gosh, we love being in the heart of the city. We love being here. And he said, okay, well, this is what the world's going to look like. It's going to cost $220 a month for parking down here. And we're going to reimburse you $180. This is Amazon, right? They cost their employees $220 a month to park in the South Lake Union parking lot. And they reimburse their employees $180. He never left the principle of accomplishing more with less. Now, some people would say, jerk, give your employees the $40. But the fact is he taught frugality, didn't he? It was part of their code. So I use an expression, and I think we all should use this with our teams and our businesses and our agents and our staff. The business needs to earn the right to do that. Listen, if someone wants something, and listen, I want it too. I often say, you know what? That sounds like a brilliant idea. The business just hasn't earned the right to buy that yet. The business hasn't earned the right to rent that yet. The business hasn't earned the right to afford her yet. The business has not earned the right to give that yet. The business needs to earn the right. If we practice frugality, if we execute lesson 10, man, our worlds would look a lot better. And you know what? When we accomplish more with less, it means that all of us are more profitable, including our agents and our operations team and our staff. Profit is your competitive advantage. Lesson number 11. And this is an important one in times of change, guys. It's earning the trust of others. You know, I'll tell you, in times of uncertainty, all we're looking for is something certain. You can be that. You need to be that. You need to be the source of trust for your people. They need to be able to trust that they're going to be okay as long as they stay by your side. You know, this industry is an interesting industry. I have to be careful what I say here, but I think there's good in a lot of brokerages, guys. There's value in different brokerages, right? I'm never going to say this is the only one, this is the best one, but I will say this. I think that the role of the brokerage is to build trust with their people, that their people can look at their leader. And I'm sharing this, right, as a brokerage leader, and there's others on the call. And I look at Bia, and I'll look at Leslie, and I'll look at other people and say, our agents better be able to trust you. That is why there's a small non-negotiable with me. And it doesn't matter how big or how small of an inconsistency or lack of trust shows up with anybody in my world, they are done. And I don't mean that as a judgmental statement, but if I can't trust someone in a very, very long thing or a very, very short thing, I think it's the beginning of the end for our business partnerships. And I look at each one of our agents as partners. I think the broker and your job as the leader for your team, the big responsibility you have is earning people's trust. People need to know that, hey, there's going to be problems. People are going to need to know that, hey, Carolyn, I wouldn't have done it that way. Hey, Noah, I wouldn't have handled it that way. Hey, Jody, I wish you wouldn't have done that. However, you may make the wrong decision. You may make decisions that other people would not make. But if they know that they can trust you during any times of uncertainty, good times, bad times, that you have their interests at heart, then you know what? They'll stick with you when you make the wrong decision. Dar, when you do something that your buyer's agent will like, well, why'd she do that? Why'd she keep that buyer? If they don't trust you, they will think, what? You're taking the best for you. But if they do trust you, they'll realize that there may have been a reason. There may have been a relationship. There may have been. Trust is so critical at all pieces of our business. And in times of change, when people have someone they can trust, they will, Jeff Bezos said, is leaders will listen attentively and their people will listen attentively. Leaders will speak candidly and their people will speak candidly. Guys, some of you have had ridiculously candid conversations with me, right? And you can. Now, if you stop, then I have to ask myself, well, what did I do such that you don't feel that you could? Now, leaders will treat their people respectfully and their people will treat their leaders respectfully as well. That's all part of trust. It's all part of trust. What's the alternative? If there is any bit of lack of trust, it breeds or perpetuates fear, right? They're just scared. They are scared about the future when they can't trust you. They are scared about their income when they can't trust you. They are scared of, like, you name it, they're scared. If we don't gain the trust of our team members quickly and over time, then fear becomes their primary driver. And then that's when people make really weird decisions and you think, well, gosh, why did they do that? Why did they go there? Why would they leave? It typically is a breakdown in trust at some point or someplace. They'll fear you, they'll fear the future, they'll fear their failure, right? That if they do the wrong thing, they'll disappoint you. It all does come down to that, earning the trust of others, especially during times of change. Lesson number 12, leadership principle 12 is dive deep. Dive deep. It's funny. I think sometimes people will question whether or not you know something is going on, right? Man, your business is really big. You probably don't realize. And most times when people say, hey, Chris, you probably don't realize, but I don't tell them, but I'm like, I knew that. I knew that. I know I do realize. I know that that's a problem, or I know that that was going on, or I know that there's an issue, or I know that that's going well, or I know. Why? Because Jeff Bezos says leaders operate at all levels of their business. They never get to a place where they say, wow, like I have people for that. Like, no, that's someone else's world. Like, you need to talk to so-and-so. Now, are there people to help? Absolutely. Should there be other people for that? Absolutely. All that is true. But a good leader dives deep into the business and knows the details of that business as well. I heard former CEO of GE that just stepped out. I'm forgetting his name. I think it's Himmel. He said, you know, I was about an inch wide in my interests, but a mile deep. Like, I kind of feel the same way, guys. Like, I have a width of about an inch in what I focus on and what I read about and what I learn about and what I care about. But man, it's a mile deep. Like, we have to go deep. And that's with our business, but also our people. Our people. Lesson 13. Have backbone. It is okay to disagree, but it's important to commit. Here's what's important for our teams to know. It's never a win or lose in an argument or a discussion. And if anyone ever feels like they lost, they will find a place where they can win. It's a concept that I think is really important as a leader, to make sure that we don't show up as having to win. And remember, we all want to, right? Like, it's like we've done it growing up in sports. We've done it with relationships. We've done it, right? Parent versus child. We've done it in business. Like, the fact is we can disagree. We can full on argue at times, but we have to be able to commit once a decision is made, and not feel like, well, I lost that one, or our people can't feel like, well, they lost that one. This is what Jeff said in a conversation. He said our culture is friendly, and intense. Our culture is friendly and intense. And then he said this, and if push comes to shove, we'll settle for intense. If push comes to shove, we will settle for intense. Why? Because it's that disagreement that drives change. So he said, we focus on making sure that our people are mentally strong. You ever have someone in your world, organization, friend group that you feel like, okay, how am I going to say this? Because if I say it this way, I think they may head down that path, and I don't really want to go down that path. And all of a sudden, we are now trying to, and I'm not talking about being rude, because some of us need to be kind, but I'm talking about just we need mentally strong people in our world and in our organizations, so that someone could say, hey, Chris, can I tell you how I really feel? Like, hey, Chris, can I tell you how you're coming across? Hey, Chris, can I tell you, like, I'll give you a very interesting story. I had early on in my career in brokerage, I was a team leader actually of the first market center, and I wanted people to like me. I wanted to like them, and I said something at a team meeting one time, and that an agent. Hey, I said it wrong. Like I sort of disqualified what someone said in as many words, and went on and continued down the team meeting, didn't think anything of it. And that person then went to Katie Benson and said, hey, I actually feel really disrespected, and I'm thinking about leaving. And Katie said, what happened? And she said, well, this happened in the team meeting. And she said, oh gosh, like I don't think Chris would ever do that intentionally. You should have that conversation. And I don't want to have that conversation. Anyway, long story short, she had that conversation. And I'll tell you, the way that I landed could have really destroyed a relationship. And if I wasn't mentally strong, it could have cratered me as well. Like I could have taken it the wrong way. I could have been offended that she took it that way. Now to this, she's still here. She runs an amazing business. She may be on the call right now. Like the fact is we got through it because she was mentally strong. I was mentally strong. I was 100% in the wrong. And it's helped me adjust how I address groups of people as well. Like she helped me. Like we have to be mentally strong, guys, and be able to have backbone, disagree, and commit, which leads us to the last leadership principle. And it's, we have to deliver results. At the end of the day, that's what our businesses are here for. At the end of the day, if it was only fun, we could do that playing golf, Kristen. Like if it was only fun, we could do that. Like I could do that reading books. Like you could do that hiking. You could do that somewhere else outside of business. We want to have fun, but the business is here to deliver results. Every single one of our businesses. And actually, every single one of our people, if we do have people, they're there to deliver results. That is a leadership principle. At the end of the day, if you're working for Jeff, it is all about the outcome. And that's what a leader is there to do, is to bring people down a path to their preferred future. Listen, if they didn't need your path, they would have been on the path already. Like, so ask yourself, are you holding people accountable to the results that they need to get, such that you're executing on your promise to them to bring them down a path to their preferred future? At times, it's just high-fiving and telling them to keep going. And at times, you need to jump in, and there needs to be some massive behavioral change. That's not always easy, but building a culture of delivering results is not going to be easy. Last thing I wanted to share is this question, guys. As we're leading in times of change, it's a question that I ask myself a lot. And this isn't in the book, the 14 leadership principles, but it was an interview that he did a couple years ago. And they were actually talking to him about space travel, not about Amazon. And he said this. He said, you know what? I very frequently get the question, hey, Jeff, what's going to change in the next 10 years? Like, what is the world going to look like in 10 years? And he said, that's a really interesting question. It's a really common question. But he said, I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years. And he said, and I would submit to you that the second question is actually the more important of the two, because you can build a business strategy around the things that will be stable over time. Right? Remember his conversation. He said, in retail business, we know that customers want low prices. In 10 years, they're not going to say, hey, can you raise those prices? Can you get that to me a little bit slower? Can you reduce my selection? There are certain things in his business that are not going to change over the next 10 years. He says, gosh, that's what I want to build my business around. So as we lead through times of change, guys, look at what's not going to change in your business. Look at what a buyer is not going to change in what they need, want, or ask for. What is a seller not going to change in what they need, want, and ask for? What is a real estate agent not going to change in what they need, want, and ask for? And build business models around that question. What's not going to change in the next 10 years? Because it's going to be a safe place to invest your energy, time, and focus over the next 10 years. Cool. Guys, we have a couple minutes. I'd love to get any maybe takeaways from any one of those 14 principles. Which one do you think might be the most important for you right now, us right now? Any that you never thought of, maybe one that you're failing in, maybe one that you're excelling in. Anyone want to share before we wrap up? Awesome. Someone unmuted. Janet's gonna share.
Chris.
I know. I know you guys are
Ownership
not.
of results, as we've got some coming into chat.
I love thinking big. I love the idea of hitting pause. I'm thinking hitting pause long enough to build something bigger. So in other words, taking less to make more in the future and bringing people along to think big so others can make more. I'm not articulating that well, but I just love the idea of that concept of slowing down enough to make it bigger or take less to get more.
Yeah. It's that reinvestment in the business, and sometimes that's energy, and sometimes that's right. In that shareholder letter, in was it 97? It was about, for him, it was at that point profit, reinvesting profit to make it bigger in the future. Yeah, love that. Anyone else?
Chris, I have lots of them, of course, but I'm going to highlight some good reminders for me are just learning and being curious. I will admit that I'm going to take ownership that I've been so caught up in trying to fine tune systems and processes, because we've shined the light on a lot of broken areas, and I've gotten away from being really curious about how to have better systems, so to speak. And then you asked that question about, is it hiring or developing? And my first thought was, well, hiring is so challenging, but really it's hiring and developing. Where I am in a leadership role is kind of like the toggle that used to happen between lead gen and working the transaction. So I'm kind of caught in that cycle. And then last, I really think that it'd be awesome if someone could teach a class about having a backbone, disagree, and commit.
That might be the Fierce Conversations class, but Leslie, maybe you can take a note of that, and we can bring something to the group about that. That'd be awesome. I appreciate that.
It's hard as a leader, and this happens in my marriage. I'll admit that it's not about winning the conversation. I actually feel really good when I can walk away and not feel like I won, but that everybody got a piece of the pie. But that's not always easy to do in leadership.
Agreed. Yeah, I think you're right, Dar. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else before we wrap up? All right, guys, I appreciate you spending an hour with me. Collectively, the what that hour is worth to this group, we can't put a value on that. And so coming together and really focusing on building our leadership skills and This week, I sort of ditched a tactical message, real estate wise, to focus on the leadership side during this time of change. And so I appreciate you being willing to hang in there with us and take those 14 and just work one at a time, guys. This is a great stack to go back to our teams with. I will get you the PowerPoint if you wish to have it, so you can deliver this to your teams, and hopefully that's great leverage for you guys. And if we're delivering this to our teams, that message is just trickling through our businesses and our brokerages and our agents, and we'll all show up as leaders within the industry, which will serve us all well. All right. In the meantime, if you need me, you know where I am. Please feel free. Anyone on this call, reach out, text me, call me, email me if you need me, and I mean that. In the meantime, we'll look forward to hanging out again next month. Thanks, guys.